Greetings, Magic Community. I'm Mike from MTG Scribe, and this is it. This is the recap or finale of Season 1 of Road to an RCQ. Uh, I did it. If you don't follow me on Twitter, then I can tell you that I went. I showed up at the event. I played in all 5 rounds, and I went 1-4, which is not ideal. But there are some pros and cons, and I'm going to go over a full recap of my recollection of each of the games, and then give some final thoughts and talk about what's next for this series. So let's go over the pros first. And the biggest pro is I showed up. If you joined me last week, I talked about a number of things that I was worried about in terms of my mental game, in terms of my fears and self doubt. And I think that was really helpful to me, to be completely honest. I'm the kind of person who, if I suffer a bad beat, or if something goes in a way that I think is unfair, or if even someone I'm close with does something to offend me, I need to complain about it once out loud, and then it's not as big of a deal from that point on. I'm very quick to get over things like that. And my hope when talking about my mental game last week was that this was going to be something similar. And I think that was mostly true. Um, Showing up was never a problem for me this time. Crossing that threshold, the thing that I said I'm the most scared of, just wasn't that big of a deal. And showing up and filling out the deck list, at no point was I really worried about it at that point. So I'm really glad I did that. I don't know if anyone else got anything out of that, but it was really important to me. And I will probably be doing that again at some point in the future, if only to help allay my own fears. Um, Second pro, as I said, I only went 1-4, but despite only going 1-4, I do feel like I played well, with almost no major mistakes. There was one we'll talk about when we get to it, but overall, and of course, I didn't play perfectly. Nobody ever does. I certainly made some mistakes that I probably didn't even notice. Um, Perhaps I should have mulliganed in a spot where I didn't, or vice versa. And it's possible I made a bad choice with Bitter Triumph, discarding a card instead of paying the life, or vice versa. But overall, there was nothing major that stands out. And like I said, there is one thing that I do want to talk about when we get to it, that took place in Game 3 that was a mistake, but I don't think ultimately affected the outcome of the match. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But I never felt like I rushed my plays. I thought that I was patient appropriately. I never felt like I overcommitted. And there were multiple times after the game when I would talk to my opponent about, the match that we just had, that they pointed out plays that they thought were both good and caught them off guard. Things they didn't necessarily see coming and were not pleasantly surprised by, but were surprised by, which made me feel great, honestly. Anytime you're in an event like this, if you can talk to your opponent afterwards, there's no need to be salty about anything. Just talk them up. Tell them good things they did. It could really matter to somebody. It really mattered to me, and I really appreciate it. Anytime my opponent was able to do that. Also, every game was close. Again, with one exception, different than the last one. This is game 5, or match 5. We'll talk about. But every other match felt like it could have gone either way if things had just been slightly different. And again, we'll talk about all that when we go over each match individually. I'll talk about the decks that I played against and give like a quick recap of how each match went. But I think there's a lot of really positive things to take away from this weekend, even if I wasn't particularly happy with the result overall. All right, so let's talk about the cons. The biggest one being that all of my concerns over the last few weeks about Waste Not as a deck in this metagame basically proved to be true. It was too inconsistent. It was oftentimes aimless without being able to push its strategy forward, and no real way to get back on track if it fell off of track, uh, beyond just waiting for things to get better. Uh, it seems like too much of a passive deck, and if you can't get Waste Not into play early, or if you can't get the right discard spells, or if you draw things out of order, it just doesn't really thrive in this environment. And unfortunately, It was a bad metagame call, which had been apparent for a while. If you've been watching this series, then I had that concern about a month ago or longer. But I had already bought into the deck early in the season when it looked like it would be well positioned. When Phoenix was the best deck, I think Waste Not was a lot more appealing. Amalia was a thing, but it was slightly less of a thing at the time. And Waste Not, I still think this is true, by the way, that I think Waste Not doesn't really have any bad matchups in the metagame, with one exception, one or two exceptions. I think the Ensoul Artifact deck is probably a bad matchup for it. Also, the Yori and Bring to Light, or all the Bring to Light matchups are bad for it. But everything else is not necessarily a bad matchup. Phoenix is a good matchup, but that's the only real good matchup it has. Everything else is, right around 50-50, which can make it feel like a bit of a slog and can make it easy to feel like you don't have enough options or enough counterplay or enough of an edge to be more than at the whim of the luck of the deck, which I hate to say, but it does feel like it's kind of true. We'll talk about this in a little bit. I do think there's a post Bloomborough version of this deck that I'm a little bit interested in because it does change up a lot of things. So we might play that. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but those are the biggest cons. And then this isn't really about the deck, but after the event, I was unhappy and I decided on the way out of the mall that the store took place in to get a smoothie, a consolation smoothie, if you will. Went up and I ordered a pina colada smoothie, which seemed like the perfect thing at the time. And it came to me in a plastic cup with a clear plastic film on top and a straw with a point on the bottom that you're supposed to poke through to get to the smoothie. And just as a cherry topper on my day, poked the straw in, and instead of the clear plastic film on the top breaking open, the side of the cup split open, and my smoothie fell all over everywhere. Which is how I described my day to my non-Magic playing friends who knew that I was going to play in a Magic tournament. That was pretty emblematic of my entire day. And that's how it ended. So, that could have been better. All right, so let's talk about the specific matchups that I had on Saturday. The first match ended up being against a blue-white control deck, which had a great start because before the game began, they mulliganed down to 5. I, playing Waste Not, very excited about this. That seemed like the perfect start to my day. My opening hand was mostly kill spells, and a Tiny Bones joins up, and a Karavik, I think, was the only other creature in the hand. But I figured they're starting out at 5. I didn't know what deck they were playing at the time. This seemed like a good mix of a little bit of hand disruption, a little bit of pressure, and some kill spells to keep them off of things. And with only 5 cards on hand, I thought I would be in a good spot for it. But as I said, they turned out to be playing blue-white control, so my kill spells were just dead cards for the most part. And I proceeded to draw 10 straight, either lands or kill spells, 0 discard, 0 the threats, which they were able to take care of. So that was not great. I ended up losing that game. It was extremely close. I think it came down, it was like a 38-minute game, I think. They were down to 7 cards in their deck by the end of it, but despite their 5-card start, I just wasn't able to take advantage of that at any point. We were mostly just jockeying for control for most of the match. I did hit a massive go blank on them at one point. Got rid of 2 memory deluges. Got rid of something like 20 cards in their graveyard at that point. And we just went back and forth for a while, but eventually they were able to turn the corner, and there's nothing I can do. Couldn't keep a threat on the board. Didn't draw one forever. Never drew a Hive of the Eye Tyrant, for example. Just nothing I could do. So ended up losing game 1. And then game 2, I was stuck on 2 lands for 5 straight turns. And it was just one of those days and one of those matches where there was nothing I could do. Even that game ended up close. At one point, I was able to stick Gissa to this. After the game, I was speaking with the person I was playing against, and they said that that was like they thought that was going to be a real turning point in the game because I stuck the Gissa. They had no way to deal with it, and then cast a draw spell, and their two cards were a land and a counterspell, and then that was it. I wasn't able to stick anything else past that. Had I been able to stick that, I think I would have probably won that game. They said the same thing that based on the way they drew after that. Had I been able to stick that, yes, the game probably would have been over. But again, it just wasn't on the cards, and I ended up losing match one to blue-white control. So match two, I ended up playing against green-red aggro, the slick shot show off aggro deck specifically. And it was a weird situation. Unlike the first game, where I couldn't draw anything but kill spells, this game I couldn't draw anything but discard spells. And that isn't the worst thing in the world. They were able to cast a Soulscar Mage early that I was able to kill with a Fatal Push. I played Tiny Bones himself. Prior to going to playing in the tournament, when I was registering the deck, I, on a whim, decided to swap out a Karavik for a Tiny Bones. So instead of Tiny Bones being in my sideboard, it was in my main deck, and the third copy of Karavik was in the sideboard, which I actually think was the right choice. That Tiny Bones came into play a lot more than I thought that it might. But anyway, so I was able to play a Tiny Bones on turn one. I was on the play, and then kill their Soulscar Mage on turn two and attack them with Tiny Bones, and then cast their Soulscar Mage. And then I drew a Hive of the Eye Tyrant and I had another kill spell. They played Slickshot Show Off. I killed it. Went to my turn four or turn five, and was weirdly oh no, I'm sorry. I take it back. My second land or my third land was I'm blanking on the name of it. Hold on one second. Sunken Citadel. My second or my third land was Sunken Citadel, so I was able to start attacking in with my Hive of the Eye Tyrant, which was great. I was weirdly the beatdown in this matchup for a while. I ended up getting them down to 3 life with 2 Hive of the Eye Tyrants out, so very easily had lethal the following turn, and they managed to just they had plotted a Slickshot Show Off the previous turn, had 1 card in hand, drew their next card, and it turned out to be, I don't know which order they drew them in or which one they had in hand, but they had both a Monstrous Rage and the Wilds of Eldraine adventure spell that gave their creature double strike, and just ended up killing me. So it is what it is. Again, 1 turn away from having lethal, and they just top decked on me. The second game, they said that they drew as perfectly as they could imagine with that deck, and I was still in that game to the point where I was again 1 turn away from getting Shieldred out, and it wouldn't have been lethal, but it would have basically been game over at that point. But I was able to go blink them the turn that I had the Shieldred, go blink them instead of casting Shieldred because they were going to kill me the following turn. And they had no cards in hand and top decked exactly Monstrous Rage, which was exactly what to put on their Slickshot Show Off to kill me that turn. The following turn, I would have drawn a Fatal Push, so I would have turned the corner and likely would have won that game as well. But again, it just didn't happen. I just couldn't draw cards in the right order, and they were able to get exactly what they needed to, and I ended up losing that game as well. This is one of those games that I may have made a mistake in when I cast Bitter Triumph, discarding instead of paying the life, or in this case, vice versa. I thought that I wanted all my kill spells, and I didn't want to discard, say, an extra Fatal Push, which ultimately I'm not sure if that 3 life would have mattered. They did kill me at exactly 0, so the 3 life did matter, but I'm not sure if like me getting rid of that other kill spell would have changed things or not. Maybe that was a minor mistake, but ended up losing to the green-red aggro deck, Slickshot Show Off, in match number 2, 0-2. And at this point, I've not won a game at all day long, which was a little demoralizing. I'm not gonna lie. Then in round 3, I ended up playing a Witherbloom Roots deck, Insidious Roots deck. I won game 1 pretty handedly. The deck was firing. My Waste Not was firing on all cylinders that match. I was able to keep them completely handless for most of the game. I got my Waste Nots out early. I had multiple Waste Nots out. I was able to go blank them at the right times to get rid of their graveyard, as obviously they are a graveyard heavy deck. And they were just never in that game. And I was feeling really good. First game I had won all day. Felt really good going into game 2. Game 2 was super close. Again, it came down to the last couple of turns, and they ended up drawing Agatha Soul Cauldron, and I just couldn't get over the Agatha Soul Cauldron. Had they drawn almost anything else, I think it would have been okay, but Agatha Soul Cauldron is really good, and there's nothing I could have done about it. Yeah, so I lost game 2, and then game 3 is where I made that notable mistake I was talking about earlier. Uh, we were in a situation where they had both a roots and a number of ways to get things out of their graveyard. They had 2 of the Forsaken Miners, Malice of Thunder Junction, the 1 black 2/2, where they can't block, but if it's in your graveyard and you commit a crime, they get to pay a black and return it to the battlefield. They also had a number of Deathrite Shamans in play, so they had a number of ways to get new things, and they had 2 copies of Insidious Roots out. So every time they did, they got another Insidious Roots or more plants out. I had boarded into multiple copies of Path of Peril, and I drew both of them this game, as well as a Karavik. There was actually a really interesting line in this game where I was able to attack with Karavik, and this is the mistake that I made. I had miscounted my mana. I thought that I had 5 instead of 4. So I was going to attack with my Karavik, knowing that they were going to build up an army with Insidious Roots in order to block. And I thought that I could Fatal Put, or I could Bitter Triumph one of their creatures to trigger Karavik to get a Path of Peril out of the graveyard at instant speed and wipe their board to get the last 3 damage in that I would have needed. And unfortunately, I had 4 mana and not 5. I couldn't both pay for the Path of Peril and the Bitter Triumph. Had it been Fatal Push, would have been okay. Had I had 1 more mana, would have been okay, but I didn't. Ultimately, didn't end up mattering. They couldn't commit the following turn, but the next turn I drew Gissa, which is the only 5-drop in that deck, and there's just nothing I could do. So it ultimately didn't really change anything. I would have had a Karavik in play still. Obviously, they blocked and killed it when I thought that it was going to get through. But even if I had the Karavik in play, I don't think it would have survived the following turn. So ultimately, again, I don't think it really matters. But it was a mistake, and I do think it's worth pointing out. Um, but again, another just super close game. This match I almost won and just couldn't quite get there. So at this point, I am 0-3, and in round 4, I got the bye. So that was my 1 win for the day. I went and got a grilled cheese at a gourmet grilled cheese restaurant in the food court. It was pretty good. Then round 5 was the only actually bad matchup of the day. I ended up playing at someone who brought Yorian Bring to Light, and I knew immediately upon seeing Yorian that I was in a lot of trouble in this match. Again, I don't think Waste Not has a lot of just straight up bad matches, but Yorian Bring to Light is one of them. So I never really felt like I was in this match. There was a play in game 1 where I held Cling to Dust for what felt like 8 straight minutes while they were going through their deck and doing all of their things. And when they went to Bring to Light to win the game, to Mystic Sanctuary to get the Bring to Light back so I could win the game, I Cling to Dust the Mystic Sanctuary, which they were very surprised by, and then immediately followed up with a Go Blank, exiling their entire graveyard. So that was a high point of the match. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything to follow it up with after that, and quickly they just gained so much advantage that I couldn't dig out of the hole that I was in. Ended up losing, and then game 2, I had sideboarded in Knights of Dusk Shadow because they had gained a ton of life off the Streets of New Capenna fetch lands, and that held them back for a while. But again, never really felt like I was in this one. Waste Not versus Yorian's Bring to Light is, again, it's not a good matchup. Yeah, finished day 1-4, and wish it had gone better. Again, a number of these matches were extremely close. A number of these games were extremely close, despite going 0-2 a number of times. In rounds 1 and 2, I feel like both of those matches could have been won had things just broken slightly different. They drew slightly worse, or I drew slightly better. I don't think that I was blown out in anything except for the last match, but it is what it is, and I finished 1-4. So what's next? I will next be playing live this Friday in the Magic Online Bloomberg Early Access event. I'll be live from right around noon Eastern on Twitch until probably the end of the day. I'm not exactly sure when I'm going to stop, but I'll probably be playing the entire day. And I think I'll mostly be playing Bloomberg Limited, although I might. We'll see what they have open for constructed queues. I'm not sure if they're just going to be doing standard or they're going to be doing modern and pioneer as well. Not fully sure on the details yet, but at the very least, I'll be playing on Twitch live all day long for Bloomberg Early Access this upcoming Friday. I had mentioned this before. There is a post Bloomberg version of Waste Not that I am sort of interested in trying. It is a little bit different than the one that I had played in that it seems it's a lot leaner, it's a lot faster, and I think that there is more ways to push damage for it. This specific version is here. I'll show you in 1 second. Right here, I cut out all of the Karavix. I cut out Kissa. I cut out a number of things and added 4 of these bandit talents to add more of like a rack-like effect to the deck. Bandit's talent, if you don't know, is 1 and a black. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent either discards 2 cards or discards a land card. I can pay a black to level it up, and then at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, they lose 2 life. So this is a way to push damage for when they don't have anything in hand. Which again, one of the problems with Waste Not as I was currently playing it is there isn't a lot of ways to push damage, and if they have no hand, it is a little bit harder to get the deck to do anything. So the Guy Reach Sanitarium, obviously, but beyond that, it can be a little bit of a frustration to have a handful of Thought Seizes and your opponent has no hand, for example. That's why I had initially tried to go into the crime route with this deck, with the Karavix and the Gissa, hoping that I could get a little more value out of my opponent being handless. It just didn't happen. The third level is the one that is probably going to come up the least, but it's 3 and a black at the beginning of your draw step. Draw an additional card for each opponent who has 1 or fewer cards in hand. So there's a little bit of a draw engine in there. One of the things that I have found about this deck is that I often have more mana available to me than I know what to do with. It can be awkward when I have Gissa in hand, or I want to double spell in an expensive way, like with Karavik and the Bitter Triumph, or Karavik and the Path of Perils, for example. But there are a number of times in this deck where I just say go, or I have a Thoughtseize in hand and I can't do anything with it, and I have 3 or 4 mana open and I can't do anything with it. So being able to convert that into card draw is pretty appealing. The other thing I added to this deck was the Devril Rogue Shadow Mages for another rack-like effect. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, it does 2 damage to them. So another way to push damage and it also can make opponents discard. I didn't have this in the previous version. I don't think one of these effects is enough to really matter that much, but potentially having, because you can only have 1 Devril in play at any given time, and that 2 damage is something, but I don't think it's meaningful. Whereas the Bandit's talent, you could theoretically have 2 or 3 of these in play reasonably, and or a Devril, and now we're talking 4 to 6 damage in a turn, which that is sizable. And I'm hoping that will give this deck an amount of reach that it doesn't currently have. might play around this with a little bit more and see if there's anything else I can add to this deck. I'm not totally sure what I want to do with it yet, but I am sort of interested in playing this. So I think probably next Tuesday, which is the release of Bloomburrow uh, proper on Magic Online and Magic Arena, I might fire this up and just see if I can get through a Pioneer League, just see what it's like. Maybe it won't feel that different. Maybe it's still not worth it in this meta, but it is different enough that I think it'll be interesting to try. And then as for Road to an RCQ Season 2, we are moving into the modern RCQ season, which I'll be honest, I am not sure what I'm going to do about. I would love to play in some sealed RCQs if I can. I don't know if that's going to be possible yet. Um, there weren't really any sealed RCQs around me for the Pioneer season, which is one of the reasons I bought into Waste Not, thinking that I could make a couple. Turns out I could only make one, but that might be different for the modern season. But uh, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. Buying into a modern deck is a lot more expensive than buying into a Pioneer deck. Having said that, I did do live drafts of Modern Horizons 3 a good amount. I've got a pretty good Modern Horizons 3 card base, and since Modern is currently apparently Modern Horizons 3 block constructed, it's possible that there is a budget option that I can find that I'd be able to play. So I want to look into that. More information on that in a few weeks. I have, again, a couple of things coming up outside of that, but I'm going to try and find a budget version of the deck and see what I can do about season 2 of this. If not, I'll certainly bring it back for standard season. I 100% have a bunch of cards for standard. That card base, I've been playing live drafts since Wilds of Eldraine, and I have bought into a number of decks prior to, or a number of sets prior to that as well. So now that rotation is happening, I think that it is extremely likely I can build a standard deck that is worthwhile. So if we don't do a Road to the RCQ for Modern, I will certainly do it for Standard. Additionally, I just found out that I can announce this. So on Saturday, August 17th, there will be the Magic Online Creator Showdown. The format for this one is going to be sealed Bloomburrow, and I am going to be part of that. I'll be streaming live that entire Saturday, and I'll be part of the tournament. So I don't know if I can say who else is playing, but I know I got clearance to say that I'm playing. So I'll be in it, which I'm very excited about. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I am much more of a limited player than I am a constructed player. It's the format that I prefer for the most part, draft or sealed. Obviously, I like draft more, but I don't mind sealed. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully, I can put on a good show and do pretty well on that. That'll be August 17th, Saturday, August 17th. One last kind of secret thing that I can't really talk about yet. I am working on something. Uh, it's going to be limited focused. It is going to be a series, and it may or may not involve someone who's playing in the World Championship in October of this year. No details yet. I'll give them to you as soon as I can, but it is a limited focus series that is something that I've never seen anyone actually do before. Very excited about it, and I'll share more details as soon as I can. And that's it for season 1 of Road to an RCQ. I overall had a good time doing the series. I am excited to do it again, either for modern or for standard, if that is what we end up having to do. I like playing competitive Magic. I really enjoy it, and I as I said last week, I prefer playing paper Magic to digital Magic. It's just that digital Magic is a lot more accessible. So I look forward to the next series, and I'm glad that I did it. Glad that I showed up, even though the results aren't what I wanted them to be. I do think it's pretty important to put out and talk about failures. Was this series a failure? I don't think so. I think it was a success in that I had a goal playing in the RCQ for the first time in my life, and I did it. So in that sense, it was a success. I wish it had gone better, but I think it's important to talk about this kind of thing. I think it's important to show when we stumble, so that it is less stigmatized. So I hope somebody out there plays in their first RCQ. Even if you do poorly, set a goal, stick to it. That's a win. It's just a win. Um, yeah, and that's it. I will be back this. Well, I'll be back on Thursday morning as normal for the weekly news update, and then I'll be online all day Friday playing mostly Bloomberg Limited on Magic Online. So I hope to see you there. Until next time, good luck. I hope tomorrow is a better day for you.